want to start with a quote from our President during the State of the Nation address in 2023. Are we on? Yes. The economic agenda cannot and will not ever be incompatible with our climate change agenda. Climate change is now an important criterion in our integral national policies, in planning, decision-making, up to the implementation of programs. The potential advantages of such enlightened policies extend to jobs and livelihood with the unlocking of the development of the green and blue economies. With these words, the President captures the very essence of DENR's mandate to preserve and protect the environment and to ensure the sustainable use of our natural resources in the face of climate risk for this generation and those to come. We are uniquely positioned on a new development trajectory with a leadership that understands and embraces both the human drivers of climate change and the inextricable linkages between climate, biodiversity, water, food, energy, and a resilient low-carbon future. This is what informs our work at the DENR. Quite simply, there can be no economy without the environment. As many of you know by now, the period between 2015 to 2023 represents the warmest years on record. 2023 was, in fact, the hottest year in 137 years. The EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service reported that between February 2023 to January 2024, average global temperatures rose by 1.52 degrees, above pre-industrial records. By October of 2023, NASA's global climate change satellite data showed us that the average global sea rise had in fact already risen 99.8 millimeters. So for those of us who have to compute into inches, that's roughly about 4, when compared to 1993. The use of fossil fuels for energy and transportation, the loss of forest cover, industrial processes, and unregulated land use change for urbanization continue to drive the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We have witnessed how the combination of rising temperatures, extreme rainfall, or the lack of it, are part of the weather chaos that we have seen around the world. For us in the Philippines, and Jaime has just made my presentation a little bit more efficient, we are now experiencing the different effects of El Niño. We also know that around 20 tropical cyclones enter our area of responsibility each year, only about 9 of which actually make landfall. The difference that we have seen is that these 9 have actually become more intense, and some of them have intensified quite rapidly. Post-Haiyan, we have witnessed the trio, Quinta, Raleigh, and Ulysses, that's Molave, Goni, and Vampo, in 2020 sweep across as many as 9 regions. The Office of Civil Defense records also showed that Typhoon Odette, or Rai, impacted 11 regions, resulting in over 400 deaths and over 255 billion pesos in losses and damages. That's an increase of these intense typhoons have actually been observed by PAGASA. It's useful to note over the last 65 years. Dr. Faye Cruz of the Manila Observatory, who is one of the lead authors of the IPCC's 6th assessment report, which is the climate physics report for Working Group 1, further notes that PAGASA projects that warming will continue, further increasing heat extremes. Drier conditions are expected over the country except for northwest Luzon. More extreme rainfall that can lead to flooding and landslides are projected in some areas of North Luzon, the Bicol region, and western Mindanao. Intense cyclones and extreme rainfall events, when combined with the subsidence that we have in our coastal areas, sea level rise that in some cases has been twice, in fact, the global average, these are the ingredients for disasters that can impact our communities, our food and water systems, and our critical infrastructure. What have we done in response to these hazards and risks? The first step was to understand the risks and recognize that while mitigation was strategic, building capacity for adaptation was and continues to be both critical and urgent. The World Bank had in fact already estimated that we were losing up to 1.2% of GDP annually in the last decade, beginning in 2011. We now have, and that figure is actually from rapid onset typhoons alone. This figure does not include the impacts of prolonged periods of drought, which we consider slow onset disasters, especially during El Niño years, and the impacts of extreme rainfall events that are not tropical cyclones on lives, livelihood, and infrastructure. Our second step was to take an integrated approach towards crafting new evidence-informed plans on mitigation and adaptation. We did this by completing 3 key documents in record time for the first time since the Climate Change Commission was organized. These are the National Adaptation Plan, the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory, and the Nationally Determined Contributions Implementation Plan as well. These three documents supported NEDA's Philippine Development Plan of 2023 to 2028 framework to accelerate climate action and strengthen resilience. With support from the UK government and Boston Consulting, the NAP took 7 months to complete, with 27 national government agencies and 15 non-government, private, and development partners were consulted. Similarly, the Asian Development Bank worked with us on the NDCIP, which was completed in 5 months with 18 government agencies and 39 non-government organizations consulted. What you see actually in that slide is a graphic from the National Adaptation Plan. What is important to note is that climate change scenarios will continue to change as data comes in and models are perfected. So this is the ranking that actually refers to exposure to heat, to extreme rainfall, to flooding. But as you can see at the bottom, and that's why I included that note, the granularity of this analysis needs to be appropriate to the level of decision-making at the local level. This is a provincial level exposure analysis. What we need for local governments is a granularity that allows them to make these decisions at the local level. Both plans were presented in time for COP28 and were referenced in our negotiations and as part of our statements and discussions at the UNFCCC plenaries and between the Department of Finance, the Green Climate Fund, the Asian Development Bank, and the other development agencies that we were speaking to, including the French and British ones. These plans are live documents. Their implementation requires not just whole of government, but a whole of society effort. They need to be periodically reviewed and updated so they remain relevant to the changing climate conditions. On the NAP, it's important to note that the complexity of hazards that compound and cascade result in different types of risks. The plan estimates that the cost of inaction within the 2030 decade to the expected increases in temperature, rainfall changes, and sea level rise, and typhoons are in fact amounting to about possibly 1.4 trillion pesos, or around 8% of 2020's GDP. These assumptions of exposure are based on the scenarios that include socioeconomic factors in the latest projection of the IPCC's 6th assessment report. Our goal here in the NAP is to build transformative climate resilience, minimize losses and damage, and achieve a sustainable socioeconomic development trajectory by 2050. The strategies and outcomes for the NAP address impacts specifically on food security, water resources, health, ecosystems and biodiversity, population migration, and the preservation of cultural heritage. That plan, I should say, is this thick. And so I've tried to summarize it for the 20 minutes that you actually have given me. Evidence-informed climate and future-proofing of land use and human settlements, livelihoods and industries, energy, transport, and communication were identified as factors underpinning economic resilience. Climate finance, risk assessments, issues such as gender equity and social inclusion, technology transfer, research and development, institution building, including accountability and stakeholder engagement, were among the essential cross-cutting outcomes of this plan. The President's instructions on the NAP were very clear. Be sure that this plan will benefit local communities directly. As we speak, we are currently, in fact, working with the DPWH on a Mindanao-wide resilient infrastructure program. Given the recent disasters that have taken place, the President has instructed this be expedited. On the National Determined Contributions Implementation Plan, our 3,340 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, we have committed 75% reduction in emissions from energy, transport, waste, and industrial processes by 2030. 2.71% of which would be unconditional, using our own resources, while 72.29% would depend on support from developed countries. The initial estimated costs are still being refined for this transition to happen, but our commitment to significantly reduce these may be achieved through a combination of targeted policies and measures, climate and energy transition financing, and access to technology as well as nature-based solutions through a combination of shifts, specifically in vehicle fuel technologies, changes in the management of agriculture and livestock, city planning, wherein we build better with less, innovative financial instruments, and our entry in both the voluntary and compliance carbon markets. There's a long history of legislation and policy that can enable inclusive climate and disaster resilient development in the country. Those creating the Climate Change Commission and the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council are among the most essential. At the DENR, we posit that there is a need to meld these with others that support our mandate to maintain a balanced ecology for all Filipinos, namely laws on clean air, water, the expanded National Integrated Protected Area Systems Act, the Extended Producer's Responsibility Law, the Renewable Energy Act, and even our Philippine mining laws. Our principal role of environmental stewardship and sustainable resource use is in engineering resilience through prevention. On clean air, the DENR is building technical capacity and improving our instrumentation network to more accurately identify sources and manage pollution. I mentioned earlier that of the 34 coal-fired plants, we are continuously monitoring live 30 of them. There are 15 cement plants that are also connected to our continuous emissions monitoring system live at the DENR. While we already maintain that SEM system, we actually need more data and more information. Given that, we recently joined a regional NASA scientific mission to understand the composition, sources, and mix of air quality together with our partners in the region, Thailand, Malaysia, and the Republic of Korea. This airborne sampling by aircraft will be used in combination with ground-based samples and satellite observations. This will allow us to better analyze and interpret what we see in order to improve public health by reducing the sources of emissions and their possible role in climate change. I also would like to add that we were able to actually board these vessels. There were two aircraft at Clark, and we were able to have 5 of our employees at the DENR join the airborne missions. Gives them a little bit of chance to see what it looks like from above. On water, we're deeply grateful for the investments from companies like Manila and the Metro Pacific Group in upgrading infrastructure, source management, and treatment, especially in this time of El Nino. As you know, the President established the Water Resource Management Office at the DNR in April of 2023. To date, we have mapped all the surface water resources in the country, entered into an agreement with the National Irrigation Authority to unlock unutilized water rights, and we have now offered in an investment forum very recently 247 potential projects to government and private sector investors in cooperation with the Department of Finance and the UK Embassy. We continue to support the DILG and the DPWH in identifying viable surface water projects and opportunities for multipurpose infrastructure investments that can deliver a combination of safe and sustainable domestic supply, manage flooding, irrigation for agriculture, and power at local and regional scales. On renewable energy, we work very closely with the DOE to update guidelines for offshore wind and floating solar projects. I've just come from a B2B event and the signing of an agreement with Secretary Loyzaga. The DOE and the DNR are working to implement a holistic and evidence-informed assessment of impacts and the streamlining of permitting processes to accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources. We are also working to determine the minerals intensity of the clean energy scenarios that are being planned by the DNR. We are also working with the DOE, We're also working with the DOE on ensuring the just transition process, specifically for human resources related to the energy sector. This is especially significant for us in relation to the human resources that we have in the global shipping industry. This sector seeks to reduce their 3% contribution to GHGs globally to net zero by 2050. That means they will shift the fuel technologies of ships to green hydrogen and green ammonia fuels. This will require extensive reskilling and upskilling of our almost 1 million seafaring professionals in order to ensure their competitiveness and that they do not affect the pace of global trade. On biodiversity and our green and blue forests, we are completing our geospatial database to strengthen conservation, enhance and regenerate our ecosystems, and scale up biodiversity-friendly enterprises for sustainable livelihoods and communities. As we did for the water sector, I'd like to say that in fact for the forests, terrestrial forests, we will be opening in the second quarter of this year 1.2 million hectares of terrestrial forests for investments in growth and protection, for carbon sequestration, timber use, and for agroforestry opportunities. We believe that by opening up this sector, we will accelerate our participation in global, voluntary, and compliance carbon markets. To understand, manage, and secure our territorial seas, we have for the first time received a budget to establish marine research stations, or the Blue Sentinels, representing 6 biogeographic regions in the Philippine archipelago. The stations will assist us in accelerating our implementation of a Great Blue Wall for the country to secure and sustainably use our coastal and marine resources. We're strategically engaging stakeholders and experts in government, academe, and non-government organizations. One of those stations we are planning to place, in fact, in El Nido, and that is an ongoing conversation with the Ayala Group. We are also charting a course towards a National Blue Carbon Action Partnership and the National Coral Reef Program. You will be hearing more about these two programs later on in the year as we engage you all strategically in the blue economy. Both are designed to deliver co-benefits to mitigation, adaptation, and contribute to disaster risk reduction. Lastly, on our mineral resources, the transition to a low-carbon future by shifting to renewable energy cannot happen without critical minerals. Our shared challenge is to mine responsibly by restoring and regenerating the disturbed environments and disrupted ecological systems to ensure social protection and inclusion and the development of our communities as well. These involve processes, technologies, and the economic and geostrategic realities that we must all confront and face. It's in this light that we have had continuous dialogue with the industry, particularly the Chamber of Mines, partners in development, as well as like-minded countries such as Australia, Canada, Japan, Sweden, and the United States. We hope to delve into these challenges and opportunities deeper in the International Mining Conference we are co-organizing in May of this year. As I close, allow me to recount what we were able to achieve at COP. By first thanking our private sector partners, such as the Sustainability Group of Ayala. The support enabled us to host the first ever Philippine pavilion that showcased new tools, approaches, financial instruments, and scalable solutions to climate change. The pavilion hosted 30 side events and had close to 1,000 international and local participants, hosted as well many numerous meetings and discussions. As one of the countries most vulnerable to climate change impacts, we successfully secured a seat on the Loss and Damage Fund Board as the representative of the Asia-Pacific Group. And we have offered to host the board in the Philippines as well. We are now in a position to contribute to the development of processes, frameworks, modalities to jumpstart the work and steer the direction of the fund. Latest pledges to the fund are at just $700 million. There is, in fact, more work to be done. The Philippine delegation was composed of the climate change commissioners, representatives from many departments, including the DNR, the DA, the DOF, DFA, NEDA, DOST, DOE, and DOLE, among others. We worked on 11 work streams that included food security, climate finance, adaptation, energy, and biodiversity. We successfully negotiated key positions and adopted decisions on the nexus on biodiversity and climate action, the inclusion of the workforce and quality jobs, as well as commitments to access the best available science. My final message today, and I know I've overrun my time, is that you are all agents and leaders of change in this room. We are at the DNR at the cusp of launching what we are calling a National Natural Resource Development Transparency Initiative for Climate Resilient Development. My ask is work with us. You can see that in this particular slide, there is a particular emphasis here on the ocean, and I'll take that up very shortly. The DNR is expected to be just like the movie, everything, everywhere, all at once. Our office is 30 million hectares of land, 36,000 kilometers of coastline, 2 million square kilometers of territorial seas. With just a shade under 0.5% of the national budget, we cannot do this alone. Mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction are critical elements in our race to resilience. These tasks must be informed by science, and they are for the whole of society and not just the whole of government. The first ask is embrace circularity. Embed EPR in your ESG. Even if you are not registered as an obliged enterprise, you can prevent the piece of plastic from going into our rivers and our oceans by making sure where it goes once it leaves your hands or your desk. Consider investments in industrial scale recycling. There are transitional and highly developed technologies here and in other countries that are already able to deliver social, environmental, and financial returns. I have been to 2 facilities. One type uses waste to fuel, and that is with the Aboitiz Group, and I understand the CIMEX and Holcim companies are also doing waste to fuel or co-processing. But I've also been to an industrial scale segregation facility wherein plastics are actually baled in 1-ton bales, and those are directed towards the plastic recyclers and repurposers, and the organic waste is actually converted into ethanol. And that was in Cebu with the Prime Info Group. Secondly, we need to make adaptation and disaster risk reduction our priorities. We are hosting the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference this year, a golden opportunity to learn and do more. We urge you to adopt your host ecosystem and your host community beyond your fence line as stewards and partners, and not just as part of your CSR, but as part of your core business value cycle. We have a program called Transform, which we'll be happy to discuss with you, which engages local governments and stakeholders like the private sector in resilience building. My last message is think blue. We have been focused on our land-based ecosystems. The first talk I gave at COP was on no Paris without the ocean. As an archipelagic country, we must not miss the fact that our seas and the ocean are the most vital global climate regulator, and therefore the main source of our survival. We need you not just to help build our country's great blue wall, but to grow, secure, and protect it for this generation and those yet to come.